Sarah Matthews sat on the dusty roadside in her once pristine wedding dress, the white silk now stained with dirt and tears. The sun beat down mercilessly on the empty highway that stretched endlessly in both directions through the Texas countryside. Her veil hung limply around her shoulders, and her carefully styled hair had fallen into disheveled waves around her face. 3 hours had passed since she had been standing at the altar of St. Mary's Church, waiting for David to arrive. The congregation had whispered among themselves as the minutes ticked by, their sympathetic glances cutting deeper than any harsh words could have. Father Martinez had tried to reassure her, suggesting they wait a little longer, but Sarah knew in her heart that David wasn't coming. The discovery had come through a text message from her best friend Jessica, who had gone to check on David at his apartment. The message was brief but devastating. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. David's gone. His roommate says he left for California yesterday with some woman from his office. He's not coming back." Sarah had stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands as she read the message. The church had fallen silent except for the sound of her grandmother's gentle sobbing from the front pew. Without a word to anyone, Sarah had gathered up her dress and walked out of the church, ignoring the calls of her family and friends behind her. Now she found herself 20 miles outside of town, having walked until her feet were raw and bleeding inside her satin wedding shoes. She had thrown her bouquet into a ditch somewhere along the way, and her engagement ring lay somewhere in the dust behind her. Cars had passed occasionally, but none had stopped. She supposed she must look like some sort of apparition, a bride wandering alone on a country road. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Sarah look up for the first time in an hour. A man on horseback was riding toward her along the fence line that ran parallel to the road. He wore a weathered cowboy hat, faded jeans, and a blue work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His horse was a beautiful chestnut mare that moved with an easy grace across the rough terrain. The cowboy reined in his horse when he spotted Sarah and guided the animal closer to the road. He pushed his hat back slightly, revealing kind brown eyes and a face that spoke of years spent working under the sun. He couldn't have been much older than Sarah's 25 years, but there was a maturity in his expression that suggested he had seen his share of life's hardships. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Are you all right? You look like you might need some help." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, suddenly aware of how she must appear to this stranger. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice cracked as she spoke. "Just resting for a moment." The cowboy dismounted and approached her slowly, as if she were a skittish animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "My name's Jake Morrison," he said. "I work at the Circle M Ranch just over that hill, and begging your pardon, ma'am, but you don't look fine at all." Sarah looked up at him. This stranger, who was showing her more kindness than her own fiancé had. "Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah Matthews. And you're right. I'm not fine. I'm about as far from fine as a person can get." Jake knelt down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Would you like to tell me what happened? Sometimes talking to a stranger can be easier than talking to folks you know." For a moment, Sarah was tempted to pour out the whole story to this kind-faced cowboy. But the humiliation of it all felt too fresh, too raw. "I was supposed to get married today," she said simply. "The groom had other plans." Jake's jaw tightened slightly, and Sarah caught a flash of anger in his eyes before he composed himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's a terrible thing for anyone to go through. Do you have somewhere to go? Family nearby?" Sarah shook her head. "My family is back at the church, probably still trying to figure out what to do with 200 wedding guests and a reception dinner. I can't face them right now. I can't face the pity in their eyes or listen to them tell me how David never deserved me anyway." "How long have you been sitting out here?" Jake asked. "I don't know. Hours, maybe." Time doesn't seem to mean much right now. Sarah looked down at her ruined dress. I suppose I should call someone to come get me, but my phone died somewhere along the way. Jake stood and walked back to his horse, pulling a cell phone from his saddlebag. Here, he said, offering it to Sarah. Call whoever you need to call. Sarah stared at the phone in his outstretched hand, but made no move to take it. I don't know who to call, she admitted. I don't know where to go. David and I were supposed to leave for our honeymoon tonight, and then we were going to move into the house we bought together. I quit my job last month to plan the wedding. Everything I had was tied up with him. Jake put the phone back in his pocket and looked thoughtfully across the fields toward his ranch. My grandmother always said that when you don't know which way to go, any direction is better than standing still, he said. She also said that sometimes the best thing you can do for a person in trouble is to give them a safe place to figure things out. Sarah looked up at him with surprise. I don't understand. The Circle M has a guest cabin, Jake explained. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and comfortable. Has a little kitchen, a bathroom, and a bed. My boss, Mr. Caldwell, sometimes rents it out to visitors, but it's empty right now. You could stay there for a few days if you need to. Give yourself some time to decide what comes next. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Jake smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face completely. Maybe that's exactly why I can help you, he said. I don't know your history or your mistakes or what people expect from you. I just see someone who needs a hand up, and I was raised to offer one when I can. Sarah stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting on the ground for so long. Her wedding dress was beyond saving, covered in dust and grass stains, but she held her head a little higher than she had in hours. I don't have any money to pay rent, she said. David controlled all our finances. We'll figure that out later, Jake said. Right now, let's just get you somewhere safe. You can't stay out here on the road. Sarah hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks of trusting a complete stranger against the certainty of having nowhere else to go. Something in Jake's manner convinced her that he was genuine in his offer to help. All right, she said finally. Thank you. I accept your offer. Jake's smile widened. Come along now, he said, echoing the words that would later seem prophetic. Let's get you settled. He helped Sarah climb up behind him on his horse, and she wrapped her arms around his waist as they rode toward the Circle M ranch. For the first time since she had walked out of the church, Sarah felt like she might survive this day after all. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer facing it alone on a dusty roadside. As they rode across the rolling hills toward the ranch, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in Jake's saddlebag mirror. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her hair was a mess, and her dress was ruined beyond repair. But her eyes held a spark that hadn't been there when she was sitting on the roadside. Maybe Jake's grandmother had been right. Maybe any direction was better than standing still. The Circle M ranch spread out before them as they crested a hill, a collection of weathered buildings surrounded by green pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. Smoke curled up from the chimney of the main house, and Sarah could see other ranch hands working in the distance. It looked like something from a movie, a place where time moved more slowly and problems seemed more manageable. Jake guided his horse toward a small cabin that sat apart from the other buildings, nestled under a grove of oak trees. That's where you'll be staying, he said. It's quiet and private. You'll have all the space you need to think. As they approached the cabin, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was grateful to have somewhere to go, but she also realized that accepting Jake's help meant admitting that her old life was truly over. There would be no going back to the way things were, no pretending that David's betrayal hadn't happened, But as Jake helped her down from his horse and she stood in front of the little cabin that would be her temporary home, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. It was small and fragile, but it was real. For the first time in hours, she began to believe that she might be able to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. Sarah woke the next morning to the sound of roosters crowing and cattle lowing in the distance. For a moment, she forgot where she was and reached across the bed for David, only to find empty space, and the memory of yesterday's events came flooding back. She was wearing one of Jake's old work shirts that he had brought her the night before, along with some basic toiletries and a promise to take her into town to buy clothes when she was ready. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny golden spirits. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with rough-hewn wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and furniture that had clearly been built to last rather than impress. It was the complete opposite of the modern apartment she had shared with David, with its sleek surfaces and minimalist design. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah, it's Jake. I brought you some breakfast and coffee." Sarah wrapped a blanket around herself and opened the door to find Jake standing on the small porch with a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, along with a steaming mug of coffee. He had clearly been up for hours already, his clothes showing signs of morning ranch work. "Thank you," she said, taking the plate gratefully. "You didn't have to do this." "My grandmother would come back and haunt me if I let a guest go hungry," Jake said with a smile. "Besides, Mrs. Caldwell, the ranch owner's wife, insisted on cooking for you. She heard about your situation and wanted to help." Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment. "How many people know about what happened?" "Just the Caldwells and me," Jake assured her. "And they're good people. They understand that sometimes life knocks you down and you need a hand getting back up. Mr. Caldwell said you can stay in the cabin as long as you need, no charge." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes again. In less than 24 hours, these strangers had shown her more kindness than David had in the months leading up to their wedding. "I don't know how I'll ever repay this kindness." "You don't need to repay it," Jake said. "Just pay it forward someday when you're able to help someone else." After Jake left, Sarah ate her breakfast and tried to make sense of her situation. She had no job, no home, and very little money of her own. Her savings account had been emptied to pay for the wedding, and the joint account she shared with David was probably already closed or emptied. She needed to call her family, but the thought of explaining everything filled her with dread. Around noon, Jake returned with a bag of clothes from the local thrift store. "I guessed at your size," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Mrs. Caldwell helped me pick them out. They're not fancy, but they're clean and practical." Sarah was touched by the gesture. The clothes were simple: jeans, t-shirts, a sweater, and some basic undergarments. But they represented a fresh start. For the first time since leaving the church, she was able to get properly dressed and feel somewhat like herself again. "Would you like to see the ranch?" Jake asked after she had changed. "Might do you good to get some fresh air and see something besides the inside of this cabin." They spent the afternoon walking around the Circle M, with Jake explaining the daily operations of the ranch. He showed her the cattle, the horses, and the various buildings where feed was stored and equipment was maintained. Sarah found herself genuinely interested in the work, asking questions about everything from breeding programs to market prices. "You seem to know a lot about business," Jake observed as they watched a group of calves playing in a pasture. "I studied business administration in college," Sarah replied. "Before David, I had my own consulting firm. Nothing huge, but I helped small businesses with their accounting and marketing. I was good at it." "What happened to the firm?" Sarah sighed. "David convinced me to sell it when we got engaged. He said I wouldn't need to work once we were married, that he made enough to support us both. He wanted me to focus on being the perfect wife and eventually the perfect mother. She laughed bitterly. I guess I should have seen the warning signs when he started trying to control every aspect of my life. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, My dad always told me that a man who tries to make a woman smaller isn't worth the air he breathes. Sounds like David did you a favor by leaving, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. That evening, Jake invited Sarah to have dinner with him and the Caldwells in the main house. Robert Caldwell was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His wife Helen was a plump, motherly woman who immediately began fussing over Sarah as if she were a long-lost daughter. That young man of yours must have been crazy to leave you at the altar, Helen said, setting a heaping plate of pot roast in front of Sarah. But maybe it's a blessing in disguise. The right man wouldn't have run off like a coward. Helen, Robert warned gently, but his wife waved him off. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Sarah deserves better than someone who would humiliate her like that. And speaking of deserving better, Jake here tells me you used to run your own business. Sarah nodded. A small consulting firm. I helped local businesses with their books and marketing strategies. Robert leaned forward with interest. What kind of marketing strategies? For the next hour, Sarah found herself deep in conversation with Robert about the challenges facing small ranches and agricultural businesses in the modern economy. She shared ideas about digital marketing, direct sales to consumers, and ways to diversify income streams. Robert listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions that showed he was no simple country farmer. You know, Robert said as Helen served apple pie for dessert, the Circle M has been struggling a bit lately. Beef prices are down, and we're having trouble competing with the big corporate ranches. We could use someone with your expertise to help us figure out a better business strategy. Sarah looked up in surprise. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to help us figure out if we need to change how we do business, Robert clarified. In exchange for room and board, plus a small salary if things work out. It might not be much, but it could give you time to get back on your feet. Sarah felt a surge of excitement for the first time in months. I'd love to help. I could do a complete business analysis, look at your marketing, maybe help you explore some new revenue streams. Jake watched the conversation with a smile, clearly pleased to see Sarah's enthusiasm returning. After dinner, he walked her back to the cabin under a sky full of stars that seemed impossibly bright after years of city living. Thank you, Sarah said as they reached her door. For everything. I know you probably think I'm just some crazy woman you found on the side of the road. I think you're someone who got knocked down hard and is figuring out how to get back up, Jake replied. Takes courage to do that. Not everyone has it. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into analyzing the Circle M's business operations. She spent her days reviewing financial records, talking to suppliers and buyers, and researching market trends. What she found was a ranch with good fundamentals but outdated marketing and sales approaches. She created a presentation for the Caldwells that outlined several strategies for improving profitability, developing a direct-to-consumer beef program, offering ranch tours and riding lessons, creating an online presence, and partnering with local restaurants to supply premium grass-fed beef. This is impressive work, Robert said after reviewing her recommendations. How soon could we start implementing some of these ideas? I could have a marketing plan ready within a week, Sarah replied confidently. And I've already reached out to 3 local restaurants that would be interested in a partnership. Helen beamed at her. I knew the first day I met you that you were something special. Didn't I say so, Robert? As Sarah's confidence grew, so did her friendship with Jake. He often joined her for meals and evening walks around the ranch, and they fell into an easy companionship that surprised them both. Jake was nothing like David. Where David had been controlling and image-conscious, Jake was genuine and supportive. Where David had tried to make Sarah smaller, Jake encouraged her to pursue her ideas and dreams. One evening, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset, Jake asked. "Do you ever miss him? David, I mean." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I miss the life I thought we were going to have," she said finally. "But I'm starting to realize that life was more about what I thought I wanted than what I actually needed. David never encouraged my business ideas the way you and the Caldwells do. He saw my ambition as something to be managed rather than supported." "His loss," Jake said simply. As the weeks passed, Sarah's marketing initiatives began showing results. The Circle M's direct-to-consumer beef program was generating interest, and 2 local restaurants had agreed to feature their grass-fed beef on their menus. Sarah felt more accomplished and fulfilled than she had in years. But more than that, she was beginning to realize that her feelings for Jake were growing beyond friendship. He was everything David hadn't been: honest, supportive, hard-working, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and dreams. When he looked at her, she felt seen and valued in a way she never had with David. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had trusted David completely, and he had shattered that trust in the most public and humiliating way possible. Could she risk opening her heart again so soon? And what if Jake didn't feel the same way about her? One morning, as Sarah was reviewing sales figures from their latest beef delivery, Jake appeared at the cabin door with a serious expression on his face. "Sarah," he said, "I got a call this morning that I think you need to know about. It was David. He's been trying to find you." Sarah's hands froze over the keyboard where she had been entering sales data. The mention of David's name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. What did he want? Jake's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. He said he made a mistake. Claims the woman he left with turned out to be married and was just using him to get back at her husband. He wants to make things right with you. Sarah stood up slowly, her legs suddenly feeling unsteady. After 8 weeks of building a new life at the Circle M Ranch, David felt like a character from someone else's story. "How did he find me?" "Your sister Jessica gave him the ranch's number. She thought you'd want to know he was looking for you." Jake's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the storm brewing in his brown eyes. "He's driving down from California. Said he'll be here tomorrow." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Just when she had started to feel like herself again, just when she had begun to believe she might have a future worth looking forward to, David was coming back to turn her world upside down once more. "I don't want to see him," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. Jake studied her face carefully. "Are you sure about that? He was your fiancé. Maybe you need closure." Sarah shook her head firmly. "I got my closure when he left me at the altar. I don't need him to explain why he abandoned me in front of everyone I cared about, and I certainly don't need him to tell me it was all a mistake now that his other option didn't work out." Relief flickered across Jake's features, though he tried to hide it. Over the past 2 months, he had watched Sarah transform from a broken woman in a ruined wedding dress to a confident businesswoman who lit up every room she entered. He had fallen in love with her courage, her intelligence, and her genuine kindness. But he had never dared to hope that she might feel the same way about him. "What do you want to do?" Jake asked. Sarah looked around the small cabin that had become her sanctuary, then out at the rolling hills of the Circle M Ranch, where she had found not just a job, but a purpose. "I want to stay," she said. "This is my home now. These are my people. I'm not going back to the woman I was when I was with David." That afternoon, Sarah called her family to let them know that David had contacted her and that she had no intention of reconciling with him. The conversation with her mother was difficult, as she had always liked David and thought Sarah was making a mistake. "Honey, everyone makes mistakes," her mother said. "Maybe you should at least listen to what he has to say. He sounded genuinely sorry when he called." "Mom, he left me at the altar," Sarah replied, "in front of all our friends and family. Then he disappeared to California with another woman without so much as a phone call. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. A series of choices that showed me exactly who he really is. Her father, on the other hand, was completely supportive. "I never liked that boy anyway," he said gruffly. "Too smooth by half. You're better off without him. And if you're happy where you are, then that's where you should stay." That evening, Sarah joined the Caldwells and Jake for dinner, as she had every night for the past month. The atmosphere was subdued, with everyone clearly thinking about David's impending arrival. "You know," Helen said as she served chicken and dumplings, "I've been thinking about that young man who ran out on you. Any man who would leave a woman like you standing at the altar isn't worth the powder to blow him up." "Helen's right," Robert agreed. "And from what we've seen, you've built something good here. The ranch is more profitable than it's been in years thanks to your work, and you seem happy. Don't let some fool who couldn't appreciate what he had mess that up." After dinner, Jake and Sarah took their usual walk around the ranch. They had walked this same path dozens of times, but tonight felt different. There was an urgency in the air, as if they both knew that tomorrow might change everything. "Sarah," Jake said as they stopped by the pond where they often watched the sunset, "there's something I need to tell you before David gets here." Sarah's heart began to race. "What is it?" Jake took off his hat and ran his fingers through his hair nervously. "I've been trying to find the right time to say this, but maybe there is no right time. I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah stared at Jake, this good man who had shown her what real kindness looked like, who had supported her dreams instead of trying to control them, who made her feel strong instead of small. "Jake," she whispered. "I know it's complicated," he continued quickly. "I know you're still healing from what David did to you, and I don't want to pressure you. But I needed you to know how I feel before he gets here and tries to convince you to go back to your old life." Sarah stepped closer to him, close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes. "You want to know something? I fell in love with you too, probably weeks ago, but I was too scared to admit it to myself." Jake's face lit up with hope and disbelief. "Really?" Instead of answering with words, Sarah reached up and kissed him. It was gentle and sweet, nothing like the passionate but ultimately hollow kisses she had shared with David. This kiss felt like coming home, like finding something she hadn't even known she was looking for. When they broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens tomorrow when David shows up?" "Tomorrow I tell him that I'm exactly where I belong," Sarah said with conviction. "With people who love and respect me for who I am, not who they want me to be." David arrived at the Circle M the next afternoon, driving an expensive sports car that looked completely out of place among the ranch trucks and farm equipment. Sarah watched from the cabin window as he got out and looked around with obvious disdain at the rural setting. He was still handsome, still charming, still everything that had attracted her to him in the first place. But now she could see what she had missed before, the arrogance in his posture, the calculating look in his eyes as he assessed everything around him for its value. Jake walked out to meet him, and Sarah could see them talking, though she couldn't hear their words. David's gestures became increasingly animated, while Jake remained calm and steady. After a few minutes, Jake pointed toward the cabin and David began walking in her direction. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothed down her simple blue dress, one of many she had bought with her earnings from the ranch, and opened the door before David could knock. "Hello, David?" He stopped short when he saw her, clearly taken aback by her appearance. The broken woman he had left behind had been replaced by someone confident and self-possessed. Her skin was lightly tanned from hours spent outdoors. Her hair was longer and less styled, and she carried herself with a grace she had never possessed during their relationship. "Sarah," he said, trying to summon his old charm, "you look different. good but different." "I feel different," she replied, not inviting him in. "What do you want, David?" "I want to make things right between us." "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. It was the biggest mistake of my life." He stepped closer, and she could smell his expensive cologne, the same scent that had once made her heart race. Now it just seemed cloying and artificial. "Come back with me, Sarah. We can start over, do things right this time." "No." The simple word seemed to shock him. David had always been able to talk his way out of any situation, to convince Sarah to see things his way. "You don't mean that. You're upset, and you have every right to be. But we loved each other. We can have that again." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You left me at the altar, David. You humiliated me in front of everyone I care about. You stole my money, my self-respect, and nearly 2 years of my life. And now you want me to take you back because your other option didn't work out?" "It wasn't like that," David protested. "I was confused, scared about the commitment. Men get cold feet sometimes. It doesn't mean I don't love you." "Love?" Sarah shook her head. "You don't love me, David. You love the idea of me as your accessory. You wanted a wife who would make you look good, who would give up her own dreams to support yours. That's not love, that's ownership." David's mask of charm began to slip, revealing the manipulative man underneath. "And what do you have here? Some cowboy who probably doesn't even have a college education? You're wasting your talents on these people, Sarah. You could come back to the city with me, restart your business. I'll help you this time instead of asking you to give it up." "These people," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly, "have shown me more genuine care and respect in 2 months than you showed me in 2 years, and this cowboy has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body." Jake appeared around the corner of the cabin, clearly having heard the raised voices. "Everything all right here?" David looked Jake up and down dismissively. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Jake said calmly, moving to stand beside Sarah. "Sarah is under my protection and you're on private property. I think it's time for you to leave." "Sarah," David said, ignoring Jake completely, "don't throw your life away on some fantasy about playing ranch wife. You're better than this place." That was when Sarah finally understood the difference between David and Jake. David looked at the Circle M ranch and saw something beneath him, something that diminished his status. Jake looked at it and saw home, family, honest work, and a good life. David saw her as someone who should be grateful for his attention. Jake saw her as someone worthy of love and respect exactly as she was. "You're right about one thing," Sarah said. "I am better than this. I'm better than settling for someone who sees me as a possession instead of a partner. I'm better than going back to a man who broke my heart and expects me to be grateful for the chance to let him do it again." She reached over and took Jake's hand, feeling the calluses from years of honest work and the strength that came from a life lived with purpose. "This is my home now, David. These are my people. And if you can't understand why that's exactly what I want, then you never knew me at all." David stared at their joined hands with disbelief and growing anger. "You'll regret this, Sarah. When the novelty wears off and you're stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing to show for it, you'll remember what you gave up." "I'll remember what I found," Sarah replied calmly. "Now please leave." David looked as if he wanted to say more, but Jake stepped forward slightly, his stance making it clear that the conversation was over. After a moment, David turned and stalked back to his car, spinning his wheels in the dirt as he drove away. Sarah and Jake watched until the dust settled, then turned to look at each other. "Are you okay?" Jake asked. "I'm perfect," Sarah said, and meant it. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm exactly where I want to be." 6 months later, Sarah stood in another wedding dress, but this one was simple and elegant, purchased with money she had earned from her consulting work with local businesses throughout the county. The ceremony was held in the meadow behind the Circle M Ranch house, with wildflowers decorating the simple altar that Robert had built. The congregation was small but genuine. The Caldwells, Jake's family, Sarah's family, and dozens of friends they had made in the ranching community. There was no expensive photographer or elaborate reception, just Helen's home cooking and a local band that played country music under the stars. But most importantly, there was no question about whether the groom would show up. Jake had been ready an hour early, pacing nervously in his best suit, while Robert tried to calm him down. When Sarah walked down the makeshift aisle on her father's arm, Jake's face lit up with pure joy and love. "Dearly beloved," the local pastor began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two people who found each other when they needed each other most." As Sarah looked into Jake's eyes and repeated her vows, she thought about the woman who had sat crying on the roadside just 10 months earlier. That woman had thought her life was over. She could never have imagined that her greatest heartbreak would lead her to her greatest happiness. Sometimes, Sarah realized, you had to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually needed. And sometimes, when you were at your lowest point and no one else was paying attention, the right person would come along and say, "Come along now," and change your life forever. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Sarah as the crowd cheered and fireworks lit up the Texas sky. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding she had planned with David, but it was perfect because it was real, built on genuine love instead of expectations and appearances. As they danced to their first song as a married couple, Sarah whispered to Jake, "Thank you for stopping that day." "Thank you for getting on the horse," he replied, spinning her around under the stars. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter and happier than she had ever been in her life. The deserted bride had found her home, her purpose, and her true love, all because she had been brave enough to accept help from a kind stranger on a dusty road. And that, she knew, made the best kind of true story of all.